get started this evening. Go for a little bit here. We're going to try to cover the chapter 49, blessing upon Judah. And that might, just looking at Judah, could very well take us the time that we've got today. Beginning in verse 8. It says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. And of course, this last part, your father's son, that is a direct reversal of what Joseph had originally prophesied, that they were going to bow down to him. Now, we saw that that particular dream prophecy, if we can call it that, had already been fulfilled.
He had his turn.
Yeah, he had his turn. And at this point, Jacob is now prophesying that from this point on, Judah will be the preeminent tribe and that people will be bowing down to him. He said, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. This whole verse, and as we'll see, most of what we will cover in here, all messianic prophecies. Because as a tribe, Judah did become the royal tribe beginning with King David, but, well, first part, your brothers shall praise you. We know that did not get its fulfillment in the tribe of Judah itself, because beginning with Rehoboam, what happened? And as a reminder, Rehoboam was Solomon's son.
They split Judah and Israel.
Yeah.
Their separate ways.
We wound up with a divided kingdom, and in fact, all the other tribes pretty much told King Rehoboam that we owe no allegiance to your tribe. We're going our own separate way. So we know that particular part of the prophecy, other than just the fact that they had all jointly declared David to be the king, after David and Solomon, we see no fulfillment at all in that first part of it, other than as a messianic prophecy. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Well, we see some fulfillment of that in David and Solomon, because the height of the Davidic dynasty and their kingdom as a whole saw its completion under Solomon. They never did conquer all of what they had been promised as the promised land.
And as a country, as a nation, they started going downhill at that point.
With the death of Solomon, from that point on, it was all downhill. So, again, the only complete fulfillment that we see of that is as a messianic prophecy. Your father's son shall bow down to you. Well, we can see the fulfillment of that in the Davidic kingdom. But obviously, I don't think that that was intended to be the total fulfillment. I believe we can see a messianic fulfillment in that. Verse 9. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He couches. He lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who dares rouse him up? Now, this is the first time we see the tribe of Judah referred to as a lion. Now, once again, I think we see kind of a dual fulfillment here, because even in their culture, lions had the same connotation as they do for us. When we see a lion, especially with regard to a kingdom, what do we think?
Power.
The king of the jungle.
Well, yeah, we see lion as a sign of royalty.
The apex predator, the top of the chain.
It's always interesting to me that biblically that has always been the lion. When a tiger, put a tiger against a lion, the tiger's going to win.
Yeah.
But of course, tigers didn't exist in the Middle East.
Plus,
But-
lions with their mane look a little more.
Yeah, they do look regal. So this is the first instance that we have of the tribe of Judah being referred to as a lion. By the way, are you aware that one of the messianic titles for Christ is he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah? That is definitely a messianic title for Jesus. Then verse 10. Now we get more blunt. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. Now, what is a ruler's staff?
It has lawgiver here.
What's that?
It has lawgiver here.
Well,
Just, I mean, that's just what Horace says. It's,
but what is that?
that's like the king. I mean, it's all, tells you what it is, the law is.
When you see a king standing up and he has a long staff, he'll hold it right with his feet on either side, and when he issues a decree, this is where the lawgiver concept comes from. When he gives a decree, what does he do with it?
Smacks the ground.
Bam! Well, so that's in some cases referred to as the lawgiver, but and the king is the lawgiver. The royal staff. Also, the other thing that you see that kings have. What do they? A lot of times you'll see a king will have in his hand
Scepter.
not just a scepter.
That's what it's called here. So,
Oh, I hadn't gotten that far yet.
that's the first time.
The orb. A lot of times you'll see a king with this round orb thing in his hand, which if he pounds that down, that's an indication that he has ruled. But anyway, the scepter, which of course clearly is a direct indication of royalty, shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff or the lawgiver, whatever, from between his feet until, now, this is the next thing here. We're going to spend a little time talking about this. Now, in most cases, in English, we always call this Shiloh. In Hebrew, it's pronounced Shiloh. Until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Now, I have come across 3 or 4 different interpretations of that term. Some commentators believe that Shiloh is a messianic title. Others believe that Shiloh is a reference to where the tabernacle was before the temple was built. Where was the tabernacle? Well, no, it wasn't in Jerusalem. Jerusalem wasn't even a Jewish possession yet. It still belonged to the Amalekites. King David had to defeat Jerusalem to make it his town.
To Shiloh.
The tabernacle was in this place called Shiloh. Some commentators think that's a reference to where the tabernacle ended up being positioned, because that before the temple was the center of Hebrew worship. Others believe that this is a messianic term that simply means the ruler or the one who is in charge. And there's 2 different alternative readings. And by the way, I say these alternative readings. Let me pause here a minute and tell you where some of these comes from. Now, I know we've mentioned this a few times before, but I know when we don't really see this brought up, sometimes we tend to forget. Anybody in here know what now, some people call it the Septuagint, others call it the Septuagint. You'll see it sometimes abbreviated in a commentary as LXX, which is, of course, the Latin numeral 70. Anybody know what that is?
That was the Greek translation from the Jews, from the Hebrew to the Greek.
Yep, and it was translated in Alexandria, Egypt, during the period of what's called the intertestamental period, in between for us would be between Malachi and Matthew. It was a 400-year period when the Bible tells us that there would be no word from God. They would spend 400 years without a prophetic voice, and God was just going to allow them to kind of wander in the wilderness for 400 years. Of course, what happened? Interesting, we see 400 years crop up multiple times. It's what happened in between what we see here and Moses, 400 years, where they went without a prophetic voice until Moses was brought up. But anyway, during that period of time, without a temple, because of course, the temple had been rebuilt, but even then, temple sacrifice was sporadic. Sometimes they sacrificed, sometimes they didn't. There were times that they allowed the temple to get into disrepair. Then another generation would get in, clean it up, rededicate it, and they'd get the sacrifice started again. So it was very sporadic during that 400-year period. A lot of the Jews, because of the exile in Babylon, no longer spoke or couldn't even read or write Hebrew anymore. But by this point, because of Alexander the Great, any educated person anywhere in the area could read and write Greek. So, as Bruce mentioned, there was a group of Hebrew rabbis and scholars in Alexandria, Egypt, that translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Now, that in and of itself is not any big issue, but here's the problem. We don't know specifically which manuscripts they used to translate the scriptures into Greek, but wherever they got them from, there are books in that Septuagint, and that's what that Greek translation is called, the Septuagint, or again, some people pronounce it Septuagint. And by the way, that Septua is a Greek word for 70, because it's believed there were approximately 70 scholars that were involved in the translation. Well, they came up with some Greek books that we don't have in the Bible. There are additional chapters in Esther. There are additional chapters in Daniel that, if you look up in a Catholic Bible, they're in there, and there's not like they're hard to find copies of. But the church early on agreed that since we couldn't find a Hebrew original for any of those, most of those extra chapters and extra books kind of got tossed out. Now, here's where it comes into play for us today. Occasionally, when we come across a Hebrew translation that's a little ambiguous, and you'll recall some Hebrew words can be translated multiple different ways, and can even mean multiple different words depending upon which vowels you use. Well, when there's some question as to, well, what is the correct translation, one of the sources that a lot of scholars today use, they'll go to the Septuagint and see, what did this Greek translation say? Because it was translated about 2,200 years ago. And they figure, well, we might not be certain as to the translation, but we figured those Hebrew scholars probably had a better idea, because again, that's 2,200 years ago. And so occasionally there will be two different possibilities as to how to translate something, depending upon how we choose to translate the Hebrew. Or we can look in that Greek translation and see, what did the Greek say? Just so happens, folks, that's exactly what we have here in this particular verse, in verse 10, where it says, until Shiloh comes. That's the accepted Hebrew translation, but there's also a variant reading which we see in the Septuagint that says, until he comes to Shiloh, or Shiloh. Well, who would the he be? If Shiloh is the place of the center of Hebrew worship, then who would he be that would be coming to be the center of worship?
The Messiah.
The Messiah. So there are those that believe that this reference to Shiloh is either a direct reference to the Messiah, or it's a reference to when the Messiah comes. Either way you look at it, you're looking at another messianic prophecy here. That the scepter, the royalty, will not depart from Judah until the Messiah comes. And guess what? That's exactly what happened.
It's listed as a key word in my Bible, and they give two definitions.
Mhm.
One is a place in Palestine.
Uh-huh.
The other is a messianic epithet.
Imagine that. I think I said that.
Mine doesn't even mention that. It's ESV. And the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the people.
Tribute is yet a third possibility as to what that word Shiloh means. So again, you know, we see that some of these Hebrew words don't always translate easily. So that's not to disagree with you or anything, just saying that's yet another possibility. But if we look at it from that perspective, who would the tribute be? But let's look at it from this perspective. The Messianic line can be traced all the way from King David all the way to Jesus. But what happened right after Jesus' ministry?
Lost over it.
Well, in the year 70, Jerusalem got burned to the ground. Temple destroyed again. The Romans deported every Jew they could get their hands on, and the ones that they didn't deport, they killed right there on the spot. The Messianic line, as far as we know, we have no record of it after that. We don't know what happened to the descendants of King David, but we can definitely trace it to Jesus. So there's an indication here that if you look at this from the perspective that verse 10 is saying, the scepter shall not depart, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until either tribute or until he comes to Shiloh, until Shiloh comes, however you want to look at it. It all looks like some way of referring to royalty will not depart from the tribe of Judah until the Messiah comes. And why until then? Because once the Messiah comes, that's it. He is the permanent ruler from that point forward. All right, verse 11.
Hang on, before you skip, the last sentence of 10. That's end times prophecy.
To him shall be the obedience of the peoples, yes.
In reference to Joshua 16:1.
And even then, you can look at it and say it's a dual fulfillment because they were obedient to King David. But then after that, we see that, if we look at it from a messianic perspective, clearly that's talking about the second coming because they rejected him the first time. Verse 11. I think we all can see when this was fulfilled, and this has nothing to do with King David, Solomon, or any of the others. He ties his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. Well, who in the world would that be talking about?
That would be Jesus.
That would be Jesus and only Jesus. I'm pretty sure David didn't ride around on a donkey's colt. I think King David generally, if he was on animal back, it was horseback. Now here's the next part. He washes his garments in wine and his robes in the blood of grapes. Well,
Interesting, they refer to the juice as the blood of grapes.
and again, you know, without looking at this from a messianic perspective, I have no doubt Jews probably read this and wonder, what in the world is that talking about? Until
They don't
you
get it.
realize that, you know, Jesus himself declared that this fruit of the vine is my blood. Direct reference right back to here. Says, and washes his robes in it. Well, what happened? He shed his blood. And even after they raffled his clothes off at the foot of the cross, they were bloody, soaked in blood. His robes in the blood of grapes. Now the verse 12, and we'll stop there.
That's a very confusing verse.
Yes, it is. But I'm going to unconfuse it for you.
Okay.
His eyes are dull from wine, and his teeth white from milk. Well, that's one of those Hebrew phrases that has two translations. One can mean dull from wine, which doesn't seem to make any sense because Jesus did not get dull from wine. So I reject that as the proper translation right off the bat, because that's almost saying Jesus was drunk.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting out of it.
Yeah, which that's not, we know that wasn't the case. The other translation of this particular Hebrew word is that his eyes were darker than wine.
That's what I have.
That's what
Okay,
mine
that
says.
makes a lot more sense.
A lot more sense.
That's a lot less confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm in a New King James. This is darker than wine, and his
Yep.
teeth whiter than milk.
It's judgment.
Well, all this says, you know, and his teeth white from milk, all this tells us is that Jesus had really dark eyes, had good clean teeth. Well, why would he have had clean teeth?
No cavities.
I would have a hard time believing that Jesus walked around with bad teeth. I'm sure his teeth were probably quite perfect. But this tells us that he had dark eyes, and
Pretty common among Middle Eastern people.
pretty common among Middle Eastern people. But there's actually a fulfillment of prophecy in that. Because the Bible also tells us that when we look upon Christ, that he was not one that was just this dynamic, handsome, you know, wonderful man that you would look at him and go, wow. That he was just, as far as looking at him, had the appearance of just one of the people. That he was a normal, unremarkable man. Now, health, I'm sure, I don't say sure, I know there was absolutely no physical abnormality in him. I'm sure he probably was a little taller than the average guy, but as far as his appearance, we're told that his appearance was not remarkable.
You didn't have any back problems, all you, Al.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, why would the Bible tell us that Jesus' appearance was
Unremarkable.
unremarkable, that he's normal?
One of us.
Yeah. It's just one more way that God identified with us, because, well, look what happened with King Saul. And I think this was one of the reasons God chose Saul originally. We're told Saul was tall, burly, and just he was one of these guys that you looked at him and go, there's a leader of men. And what happened with Saul?
You led them astray.
Yeah, he was a leader, all right, leading in the wrong direction. And after that, he picked the run. When he went with David, he picked the run of the litter. And turned out that David was, other than Christ, the best king they'd ever had. Now, David had problems. He made some mistakes. But David was a leader, and he was short. He wasn't particularly remarkable. Wasn't somebody, in fact, when Samuel showed up at Jesse's house going, okay, bring me the next one. No, that's not here. Bring me the next one. No, that's not him either. And he said, well, we only got one left, and he's the runt. He's outside dealing with the sheep. Bring him in. And he comes in, the runt of the litter. Samuel looks at him and says, that's him. The last one they would have expected. And of course, we see that Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of that he's definitely the leader, but not one that anybody would have expected. This is God's man.
Doesn't look like royalty or anything.
Yeah.
But it's
It's
rejected.
just one more way that God identifies with us rather than trying to be ahead above everybody.
Probably why the Jews rejected him too.
Mhm. I'm sure they were looking for another Saul,
Yeah, they were looking for
Yeah.
the great military leader to
Mhm.
free them from the Romans.
and it didn't happen that way.
They didn't realize it was suppression from sin they were going to be freed from.
All right, questions this evening?